All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. Got to tell you something. The conspiracies are getting longer, wilder, more ludicrous, more out of this world when it comes to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. And then we have the standoff that's occurring in the Ukraine. So who better to bring on the show on a Friday afternoon to help me try and make sense of this screwed up world that we live in? Except my good buddy, Howard Bloom. He's the author of The Mohammed Code, which is available on Amazon.com. And he's got some great books, including The Genius of the Beast, The God Problem, and other great books and articles available on his site at www.howardbloom.net. And Howard, what in the world is going on?
Well, it's one of those. It's the opening to a weekend, and this weekend's going to be one of those totally puzzling weekends where there are 70 balls in the air, and we can't even be sure there's a juggler who tossed them and who is waiting to catch them. The Malaysian airliner situation is totally unresolved. We have reports that the plane automatically pinged its way in 4 times at 4 specific parts on a route that would have taken it jagging off of its route radically to the west and up toward the Andaman Islands. We have reports that the transponders on the plane were turned off a half an hour apart, meaning there was somebody alive on that plane in that intervening half hour. And we have reports that the plane flew for 4 hours or 3 hours after it lost contact with the ground. So we have no idea. When it comes to the Crimea, we feel we are in great suspense, and in reality we're not. Vladimir Putin is very intent on taking Crimea. So there's no question about what's going to happen over the weekend with the referendum in which the local population of the Crimea will vote on whether to be whether to be independent and cast its lot with Russia and the Russian Federation or not. That vote will come out strongly in favor of the Russian Federation. There are troops in the Russian Federation, Russian troops, to guarantee that. And so we know that's going to happen. The big question is how much other territory, if any, is Vladimir Putin trying to lay his hands on? And meantime, there are several little events that are getting lost in the shadows. Boko Haram, the Islamic extremist group in Nigeria, has pulled off a couple of more of its terror attacks, and those terror attacks tend to kill 50 innocent people at a time, often students. There has been another knife attack in China. This one has killed a small number of people and has wounded about 20, has killed about 5 people. But this is the second time this has happened in China in the last 2 weeks, and the Chinese are blaming this on Islamic extremists from their Xinjiang province, the Uyghurs. Now, what holds all of these things together? It is just possible that Islamic extremism is underlying the downing of the airliner. It's just possible. It's not necessarily true. And in the Crimea, in the Ukraine, there is an Islamic tie, but it's not really relevant. It's not affecting things. The Tatars, who were the original majority inhabitants of the Crimea, were thrown out of the Crimea in one of the great ethnic cleansings of Joseph Stalin. But there are still some Tatars left there. They are still faithful, loyal, and true to Islam. However, in this case, the great terrorist is Vladimir Putin, or that's the way we see him. He sees us as the great terrorists. That's the situation in a nutshell.
You know, there's so many things going on, and I was reading just before we went to air a news release or a news bulletin from CNN. For the first time in more than a decade, Americans feel that Russia is a serious threat to the U.S., according to a new poll. And they really don't like Vladimir Putin either. According to a CNN ORC international poll released today, 69% of those surveyed say Russia is a serious threat to the U.S., a 25-point jump since 2012, and the highest number on that question since the breakup of the Soviet Union. More than 7 in 10 say there is no justification for Russia's actions in the Ukraine, and nearly half believe that a Cold War is likely in the next few years. As for Putin, he saw a 14-point increase in his unfavorable rating to 68% from 54% just before the Winter Olympics started in Sochi, Russia last month.
Well, that must make him very happy. Because Vladimir Putin feels that the greatest catastrophe in modern times for Russia has been the dissolution in 1989 of the Soviet Union. And he has been working very diligently to repeat the kind of power that the Soviet Union once had, and especially to get personal attention for himself as one of the world's most important leaders. So he's announced a policy. And the policy is that if there are Russian-speaking people whose interests he must defend in order to guarantee the peace, he will send in his troops, no matter how reluctantly, and they will guarantee that peace.
All right, stand by, Howard. We've got to take our first break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Howard Bloom is my special guest. www.howardbloom.net is his website, and he's the author of The Mohammed Code. It's available on Amazon.com. We'll be back in 2. Don't go away. Named one of the world's greatest psychics, Elizabeth Joyce is now giving readings worldwide via Skype. Elizabeth Joyce is recognized for her clairvoyant ability to help find missing persons, her analysis of dreams, past life regression work, mediumship, and her accurate predictions. Elizabeth has been a frequent guest on the X-Zone radio show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, now for several years. For an appointment with Elizabeth Joyce, call 201-934-8986 or Skype at elizabeth.joyce. And for more information, you can always visit Elizabeth Joyce online at www.new-visions.com.
Do you have a dis-ease that you would like to alleviate through a natural means? Have you been contacted by angels, ghosts, or even extraterrestrials and want to validate these experiences? Or would you simply like to speak with someone who can help you find your life's purpose? I'm Dr. Joseph Mara, and I'm offering my services free of charge for first-time clients contacting me during the month of April. These free consultations include angel card readings, guided meditations, life coaching, and energy healing. If you have always wanted to explore these types of experiences but were skeptical or simply could not afford them, then take advantage of this free special offer. Contact me through my website, aguidinglight, spelled lite.com, to schedule your consultation today. Until then, I offer you love, light, and laughter.
Welcome back, Exo Nation. The conspiracy theorists are having a blast with the mystery disappearance of Flight 370, the Malaysian airline aircraft that went missing 6 days ago. And I've heard things like I've received emails from the UFO community from MUFON, who's claiming that Flight 370, the 777 from Malaysian airline, has actually been abducted by aliens. And then I received an email yesterday from Alfred Weber, who tells me that, according to Lorraine Moret, who they did, there was an article on this apparently in the Exopolitics or Neopolitics or whatever, rag that they dispel their garbage in, that she's now saying that it was the United States Navy using a laser weapon that downed, well, wait a second, it gets worse, Howard, that downed the Malaysian airline Flight 777 to show President Putin the power of the U.S.
That's amazing. Well, of course, my favorite is the one that you told me about a few days ago, the UFO people that you just cited, claiming that this entire plane had been snatched by flying saucer people, probably to be dissected and, of course, to be sexually molested. I mean, can you imagine aliens sexually molesting a giant plane?
No.
Well, since they don't know the scale of creatures here on Earth, that makes as much sense as a pollywog, as a sexual object. But it's an emotionally satisfying explanation. Unfortunately, it's not the explanation. And the real mysteries are not so much with the plane. We hope we will find that out. I mean, we still haven't found Amelia Earhart, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Although there are hypotheses about finding her. The world system, the system of global communications, you've seen some interesting things happen in the last couple of days because of the downing or the disappearance of the Malaysian flight. The most interesting was that the Chinese said that they were using 10 satellites in order to track down this missing plane. Well, the fact that the Japanese or the Chinese could say that they had an extra 10 satellites up there whose focus they could dedicate to this project was a major geopolitical statement. That was a major superpower statement. That statement was thoroughly in line with the Chinese budget, which was about $130 to $140 billion for the year for their military. The humongous amount of money. And the Chinese they're trying to establish their dominance in the entire sea area that right now is being combed to find the wreckage of this vessel. So that the mere statement that they had those 10 satellites was quite an amazing statement. But beyond that, what they were hoping for is that they would find the thing. If they could find the thing, they could demonstrate that they are the new masters, that they are the new protectors of our peace. Unfortunately, the fragments that they felt they had found turned out not to be fragments of this flight, and they didn't come out looking this good. A couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, you and I talked about the fact that there is a battle going on for world leadership right now.
Yes.
And Vladimir Putin has been using things like the Sochi Olympics to burnish his image and make himself look powerful. The Chinese are trying to make themselves look like the good guys. Everybody wants to look like the country you can rely on and the leader you can rely on whenever you get in trouble. And that's Vladimir Putin fired his the entire staff of the official government news agency, which had a good reputation as a journalistically sound organization, and replaced all of the people within it with a Vladimir Putin cheering squad to tell the world that if you have trouble, ask Uncle Vladimir. Vladimir Putin will go to the rescue, and everything will be fine. He was trying to burnish this image, especially after he and Lavrov, his foreign minister, solved the problem with Syria by offering the United States the dismantling of the chemical weapons. Well, the Chinese were jumping in to acquire that mantle of the good, peaceful guys of the world who can solve problems with their 10 satellites. Unfortunately, as of 2 days ago, it hadn't panned out for them. And now the United States has jumped in to that divide, to that gaping hole, to that vacuum. And the United States is talking very quietly about the fact that we're the next experts up when it comes to finding this plane. We'll see how well we do.
Well, you know, I have to admit that the United States has the experience when it comes to air crash investigations. The NTSB has a very, very good record. But it scares the hell out of me now if I was to take an aircraft flight in the area, you know, Malaysia, Thailand, China, in that part of the world where the air traffic controllers and the military have no idea where that plane is.
Well, I'm about to go to Japan. Now, admittedly, that's a little bit further to the east than most of these places, and is a very sophisticated, technologically advanced country, more technologically advanced in many ways than the United States. But it is a bit concerning. My assistant came to me and said, well, there's a flight on Malaysian, or there's several flights on Malaysian Airlines. Do you want to take them? Well, I don't mind taking them. The odds of another incident like this are very small, but you know, the security situation is far more lax in these airports. I mean, when you step into the airport in Seoul, Korea, it is this gigantic, amazing place. It looks so new that it's ridiculous, and it's nearly empty. and the security procedures are not as tight as ours. The same is true in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. The security procedures are not as tight as ours. So they never, you know this story already. There were two people with false passports. They both came from Iran. It took time to figure that out. And our State Department, for some reason, does not believe that they could be tied in with anything of a terrorist nature. Nonetheless, the security people at the airport in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia did not check their passport numbers against the list of forged and stolen passports, and as a consequence didn't spot the fact that these two people were flying on stolen passports. That would not have happened in the United States, where we still remember 9/11 fairly vividly.
Yes.
But so it is a tricky part of the world. The New York Times came out with a piece that said that Malaysia has gotten away for many decades with, it's gotten away with a simple racist policy. And its racist policy is that if you are of Chinese descent or if you are of Indian descent, you can't make it to the top of the government. You simply can't. All of the major positions in the government are reserved for the local Malay Islamic population. And according to the New York Times, that's led to a certain degree of inefficiency in Malaysia and to putting people on top who are not top-level people. Now, that could be that, in fact, I know it's true. Because the Malaysians have been very, very good to me. They had me create a program called Reperceiving Leadership for 10 of their CEOs and general managers a few years ago, and they flew me to Kuala Lumpur to give as an intensive to those CEOs and general managers. I enjoyed those people enormously. They were terrific people. One of them had gone out in a very competitive environment and had founded a telecommunications company from scratch in Bangladesh, from scratch. And that had to be up to world standards, or it wasn't going to cut it. But there are people who are coasting and loafing in the upper reaches of the Malaysian government. So that is a bit of a problem, and it does lead to security problems. Whether it leads to the kind of maintenance problems that might be behind the disappearance of a plane like this, we don't know. However, Malaysia is relatively free of terrorism. Malaysia is one of 57 Islamic countries, and many of those countries have severe problems with terrorism. Indonesia, right next door to Malaysia, has a terrorist group, the Jamaat. I forget the last name, but it is one of the most disturbing terrorist groups on the face of Earth, and may conceivably have been involved with this plane's disappearance, as the Uyghurs in China, those who believe that what the Chinese call the Xinjiang province is really, quote, East Turkmenistan, and is an Islamic province. We do have these Muslim versus non-Muslim clashes on this fault line. But one of the wonderful things about Malaysia, it may be a slightly sleepy country, but it's very modern. It is extremely modern. It makes New York look antique.
You know, when looking at the map of the area where all this is happening, the mystery disappearance of Flight 370, you've got the plane taking off from Kuala Lumpur, going to the waypoint where the transponder just ceased, the very last communication with that aircraft. Then we see it crossing Malaysia back to Vampi waypoint.
Right.
Then it goes up to Gival waypoint, and then heads towards the Igrex waypoint. So obviously, if somebody is on these waypoints, it has to be someone who knows how to fly that plane.
That's assuming that the pattern of beeps that we are interpreting all belong to that flight. And that's a process of inference that has connected them together.
Now,
so we're still connecting the dots, and we could have connected them wrong. We don't know yet.
I think the Malaysian government's done a pitiful job in this. And now the U.S. officials are probing the lithium batteries in the cargo area that may have been a factor in the disappearance. Like, it seems that nobody knows what the hell is going on.
No, nobody knows what's going on, but this process is unfolding. Look at the Amelia Earhart disappearance. This process is unfolding in days where it took months and years in the case of Amelia Earhart, because we have a far greater communication system. We do have satellites. In fact, it's surprising with all of the satellites that we've got that we haven't been able to track the path of this plane. And we're on our way to even more satellites. China has a total satellite system. That's why it's able to delegate 10 satellites to looking into this problem. So our communication system is far more advanced. The surprising thing is that it's not advanced again yet for us to have had a continuous picture of what was happening with this plane. We're putting together little tiny data points and trying to connect them and make sure they're connected to this particular plane. But there's more going on. I mean, let's go over to the Ukraine for a second. We are threatening, we're saber-rattling, we are threatening the Russians. We are saying that we're going to level sanctions against them. We're saying that we have an entire, get this, 4-page long or 5-page long typewritten list with 300 names of people we're going to sanction. Doesn't that sound a little insignificant to you? It certainly sounds insignificant to me. And here's what we're up against. Vladimir Putin holds all the cards, and it's surprising that when the European Union embarked on a course of offering the Ukraine an either-or choice, either you're with the European Union and you cut Russia, or you're with Russia and you cut the European Union. That was not a fair choice.
Howard, stand by, my friend. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exo Nation Howard Bloom is our special guest. He's the author of The Mohammed Code, as well as other great books like The God Problem and The Genius of the Beast. His website is www.howardbloom.net. The Mohammed Code is available online at Amazon.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Are you considering calling a psychic to read your situation? Then consider David Champion, a psychic medium for more than 20 years with thousands of readings under his belt. David Champion will make you feel comfortable. He has proven to be honest and accurate. He's a straight shooter. There's no guesswork. What he sees is what you get. While he is a medium, most of the calls focus on relationships, not only love, but work, school, neighbors, and more. Need help with finding a job and preparing for the interview? Are you dealing with people who are obstacles in your path? For more information, go to davidchampion.com, $1.50 per minute paid by credit card with a minimum of 30 minutes. For your reading with David Champion, call 1-877-702-8598. That's 1-877-702-8598. Now you can dial in to listen to the X Zone radio show from anywhere in the world with Rob McConnell 24/7, 365 by dialing 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080. If you have a mobile phone or landline, the X Zone radio show with Rob McConnell is now at your beck and call at 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080, 24/7. 365. All right, if you're into the weird, the bizarre, the fringe, the ludicrous, and you want to know what the wackos of the world are thinking happened to Malaysian airline flight 370, go to www.xzoneradiotv.com/ flight370.htm. My guest this hour is Howard Bloom. He's the author of The Mohammed Code, which is available on Amazon.com, and he's also the author of The Genius of the Beast and The God Problem. His website is www.howardbloom.net. And Howard, you and I have been talking about the Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 and the Ukraine. One of my producers wanted to know if the events of Flight 370 could be a diversion for what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine.
Well, it certainly has worked out that way, and what's going to happen is we're going to see by Monday just how weak we really are. And why are we weak? We're weak because Russia supplies 30% of the natural gas to Europe. If it turns off the natural gas now, while it's still winter, a whole bunch of people are going to freeze. The country, there's a country whose entire industries run off of the natural gas it gets from Russia, and that country is Germany, which is has been the leading domestic exporter or the leading exporter of goods, and one of the top 2 leading exporters in the world, in fact, for the past 20 years or more. Germany's steel industry and all the others depend on Russian natural gas, and yet it's Angela Merkel, the Prime Minister of Germany, who has made the strongest statements standing up against Russia. But there's another card, and this is one that you probably haven't heard about. This is a card in Vladimir Putin's hands. One of the great signature accomplishments of the Obama administration is withdrawing American troops from Afghanistan, which we are planning to do very shortly. The route through which those troops are supplied and the route through which they will have to withdraw goes through Russia. So if we level sanctions against 300 people, a whole 5 pages worth, on Monday, to retaliate against Vladimir Putin's takeover of the Crimea, which will happen this weekend, that takeover, all Vladimir Putin has to do is say, look, I'll cut off your gas, and I'll cut off your route of exit through Afghanistan, and you'll be stuck with 35,000 troops minimum in Afghanistan. So Vladimir Putin holds all the cards. This is a poorly planned, it's a poorly planned effort because apparently when the Berlin Wall fell and when the Iron Curtain went down in 1989, the Europeans and the West agreed with Russia that we would not encroach on their sphere of influence. And the Ukraine is in their sphere of influence, Belarus is in their sphere of influence, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are in their sphere of influence. And the European Union, ever since then, has been greedily gobbling up former nations like this that were part of the Soviet Union. And so one thing that I've referred to this a number of times on this show, but if you read Pravda RU or RT, which is the Russia's Today television, if you read the Russian sources that reflect Vladimir Putin's point of view, Vladimir Putin was saying as long ago as 3 years ago, or his newspapers were, that the plan of the Obama administration was to start World War III by taking Syria and then sending American troops up to Moscow. Now, that sounds crazy to you and me, but the fact of the matter is that the Russian outlets that reflect Putin's thinking have been saying that the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, that Russia has been at war, and it looks like a very hot war, with the West and particularly America for a long time. This is nothing new to a Russian audience.
What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that we're going to look at ourselves 3-4 months from now and see ourselves in the same situation we were with the last Cold War?
I think we're going to find ourselves humiliated because Putin is already preparing to take more territory. Mm-hmm. One of my fans in Sweden went to a military university lecture last week, and 2 Russian experts were speaking. These are Swedish Russian experts. And these Swedish Russian experts had figured out that Vladimir Putin has got a new strategy, and the new strategy is you move into territory that you want. When you sense a weakness on the other side, you move in with troops in unmarked uniforms and unmarked vehicles. Then you wait until the Fuhrer dies down, and you settle the problem diplomatically, holding the territory. And then you look for another weak territory that you can seize because there's a power vacuum. And you and I have already discussed this, but the fact when President Obama drew a red line in Syria and then allowed Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, to get him off the hook by setting up a deal to get rid of chemical weapons, but a deal that also validated Bashar Assad as a leader in Syria. When he did that, that was signaling a profound weakness to Vladimir Putin. I mean, it may have been a wonderful idea to avoid war and to not use Tomahawk missiles, but we're going to see the implications for a long time to come. And when Hillary Clinton compared this strategy of Putin's to the strategy of Hitler, who said, oh, my German-speaking people, they're all over Europe. It's my job to protect them, and started marching into territories like the Sudetenland and Poland. Well, that is exactly the strategy that Vladimir Putin is using now. Her comparison to Hitler was roundly criticized. There's no room for criticism because what she was saying was perfectly true.
Tell me, Howard, do you think that President Putin used Syria as a testing ground to see exactly how far he could push President Obama?
He absolutely did. There's no question about it, because you can see exactly the same script being used in the Ukraine. According to Bashar Assad's side, let's look at the alignment here. Russia is in an alignment, in a military alliance with Iran and with Syria. Iran uses Syria as a proxy state, which is why it scares the hell out of countries like Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is up against a bigger alliance than it can confront on its own. So the way things are portrayed in Syria is that the people we call rebels and that we tend to support are mindless terrorists, that they are creating unspeakable violence, that they are fascists, they are monsters. And so anybody who battles them is simply fighting on behalf of peace and the unity of the Syrian nation. Well, that exact same script is being used in the Ukraine. The people that we support, what we call peaceful street demonstrations, are portrayed in the press on the other side, on the Russian side, as the moves of terrorist thugs, fascists, Nazis, who have done nothing but kill and murder in the streets in order to violently take power. So the government in the Ukraine that we feel is a peacefully installed government, to them is a government that's been stolen. And the only valid leader to them in the Ukraine is Yanukovych, because he was actually elected. He was not installed in place by a violent Nazi street mob. And these are the same scripts that are being used in Syria. The people on the other side are the violent ones. And, of course, we're using a somewhat similar script in portraying the people on the pro-Russian side as thugs and underlooking the violence that you and I have both seen in television clips of the street demonstrators in the Ukraine who were sitting there, and we all saw this, preparing hundreds of Molotov cocktails. I don't know if you saw. There was one image. There was one image that was extremely striking, and it was in the early days of the Ukrainian protests, and it was of a troop transport, an armored troop carrier, being hit by Molotov cocktails and the whole vehicle going up in flames. Well, that's not peaceful protest.
No, it's not. Didn't President Obama, who's telling the world and leading the world into saying that President Putin is breaking international law and non-sanctioned this, that, and the other thing, didn't he do the same thing in Afghanistan?
Well, in Afghanistan, and what about the National Security Agency that's spying on just about everybody in the world?
Yeah.
Isn't that a slight incursion on the principles of politeness between nations, to say the least? So, yes, the United States is, it's a superpower.
And it's not going into court with clean hands.
No, it's not going into court with clean hands at all. And when Kerry makes statements, remember, we talked about this in the very beginning of the Ukrainian crisis. The Ukraine has traditionally been Russian territory because the Russian nation was established in the Ukraine around 950 A.D. That's over 1,000 years ago. The Russian people, to the extent that there was a Russian people, were Vikings, and the Viking princes who called themselves Russians ruled from Kiev, which is the capital of the Ukraine. Moscow didn't become a significant force. The princes of Moscow didn't become a significant force in the Russian world until approximately 1550 A.D. That's 600 years later. Now, my Ukrainian friends, when I've said this, have immediately pounced on me and said, we have our own Ukrainian language, we have our own Ukrainian ethnicity, we have our own Ukrainian nation. And they're right. If you read the poetry of the Ukrainians, you'll find that it is filled with Ukrainian grievances against Russians and Poles who ruled over the Ukraine. So it's both true that this is traditional Russian territory, and it's true that it has its own ethnic identity all at once. But we are acting as if none of these factors exist. And that's a little bit crazy.
What is going to happen come Monday? Putin takes over the Crimea because, he's protecting all the Russian people in Crimea. What happens to all the other countries on the planet who've lost countries to other countries where their citizens are? Will this give them the green flag that they too can invade another country and take back land and people that used to belong to them?
Yes, it will tend to give the green light to all of that. I mean, we have an option of somehow confronting Vladimir Putin in a more muscular way, and that sounds like military. And if with a military response, we can easily start World War III with no difficulty whatsoever. And yet, if we don't respond in some way that looks muscular, we're going to encourage Putin to do a lot more of this, and we're going to, as you just said, encourage others to do a lot more of this, because everybody's got an excuse. I mean, supposing we decided to take all territories where there were English-speaking peoples and take them over military to protect the English-speaking peoples of the world, there'd be scarcely a scrap of the world left that we hadn't taken control over. Yes, this is a dangerous time, and we're between a rock and a hard place.
I've actually lived through that situation, going back to the 60s in Quebec, when you had the FLQ trying to, pressing the fact that, they wanted to separate from Canada, maintain the French culture, and so on and so forth. And you had Prime Minister Trudeau, who at the time invoked the War Measures Act and sent the troops into Quebec.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the French were not in a position to give a really strong response. The Russians have maintained their military since the days of the Cold War. The Russians have one of the most advanced nuclear forces over. That's an understatement. The Russians have what may be the most advanced nuclear force in the world. At least they have one of the top two most advanced nuclear forces in the world. They have troops at the ready. They have massed somewhere around 22,000 of their troops for military exercises on the border with Ukraine, and that's in the last 2 days. They've been doing night exercises on taking territory. On bombarding the other side with military weapons that reach places 2 miles and more away. So this could turn very, very, very nasty. And this is really a time for Vladimir Putin in person and Barack Obama in person and Angela Merkel, because she has balls, and I'm not sure that Obama always does, to get together in person and try to work this out.
Do you think it'll work out, or do you think that we're looking at a cold day in hell with another Cold War?
I think we're looking at a cold day in hell with another Cold War if we're lucky, and a hot war if we're not lucky.
In case, or if things really got bad, would China join Russia?
China has been trying to stay calm about all of this, but Vladimir Putin counts on China to be with him. He talks about having the Great Eurasian Alliance, which is a whole other subject for another time, and that alliance would include all of the former Soviet states and includes China. So he regards China as a military ally, and if they're involved, their military has been bulking up by 15% or so every year, sometimes as much as 30%. And though, we spend the United States spends close to $1 trillion a year on military, somewhere around $750 million a year. The Chinese are spending about $140 million a year. The United States still outspends, it is said, the next 14 nations in line combined. But the fact is, we've demonstrated with Iraq and Iran that our military is not capable of winning a war. That you may have a lot of weapons and you may have a fair number of people, but that doesn't mean you've got a strategy that's capable of winning a war. Plus, a hot war this time would not just reach Paris and Berlin and turn those cities to shambles. It would reach you and me in North America, because with intercontinental ballistic missiles, we no longer have the luxury of being walled off from the world by oceans the way that we did in the days of World War I and World War II.
Something that amazes me, nobody's pointed the finger in the disappearance of Flight 370 to North Korea.
Well, that would be, they haven't pointed it to North Korea in all probability, because North Korea has its enmity, its hostility directed toward Japan. It's unlikely that they would be doing something, especially something that threatened 235 Chinese passengers. 70% of roughly of the passengers on this plane were Chinese, and the Chinese are very concerned about this. If the North Koreans ever turned against their Chinese mentor, that's the only protection they've got. That's their big brother. and they can't afford to antagonize China.
All right, Howard, stand by. We've got to take our final break. Howard Bloom is our special guest. He's the author of The Muhammad Code. It's available at Amazon.com. And his other books include The Genius of the Beast and The God Problem. His website is howardbloom.net. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. We'll be back on the other side of this short break. Don't go away.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multifamily dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. Former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes, finds a locket, or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. For the weird, the bizarre, the ludicrous, the conspiracy theorists, www.xzoneradiotv.com/flight 370.htm is the website. Go check out some of those stories. We're going to be updating that site as soon as more of these people are brave enough to send me their actual thoughts. It's scary, I'll tell you that. Howard Bloom's our special guest, the author of The Muhammad Code. It's available on Amazon.com. His website is howardbloom.net. And Howard, you told me during the commercial break the word for this segment is pirate.
Yes, exactly. What we're overlooking here is that the straits, the sea lanes in the area of Malaysia and Indonesia are traditionally the home of pirates. And what do pirates do? Pirates take a big vessel with cargo and humans, and they hold them captive, and they go for a ransom. The idea of going for a big ransom, a big whopping ransom, is a traditional part of Islam. It's in the Quran. So it is conceivable that pirates have taken this plane and are holding its passengers and the plane itself hostage for the day when they will reveal their hand and ask for a huge, huge amount of money. The big trick is that this plane takes a landing strip almost 2 miles long to land and to take off. So the question is, where would the pirates have access to an airstrip of that size? And there's a second little element.
Okay.
And that is, the big question is, why did the Obama administration draw attention away from the Iranians flying on false passports?
Good question, Howard. Good question.
It may well be because Iran is trying to, or the United States under Barack Obama is trying to make peace with Iran. And in order to make peace with Iran, it is doing contortionist-style pretzel walks. It is contorting itself in every conceivable way, trying to make nice and come to some sort of conclusion to the nuclear weapons problem with Iran. But when you contort yourself in that way, you may sometimes avoid the truth.
Howard, could we be possibly seeing the newest form of pirating? We've all heard about the Somali pirates. We've heard about the ships that they pirate. Gosh, I watched Captain Phillips the other day. What a fantastic movie. Tom Hanks did a great job. Could this be the new pirate?
It absolutely could, because as I said, from Somalia on up to Malaysia, you have Pirate Central. And there's no reason, if you and I were going to be pirates, first of all, imagine that you're like the guy who's called the Marlboro Man in Mali, who took that entire French natural gas facility hostage. You're out for headlines, and the more spectacular the move you make, the more headlines you get, and then you hold on to the ransom. So there's a combination here of either piracy all by itself or possibly piracy in the name of militant Islam.
It's going to be a very interesting week, my friend, and I can't wait to talk to you the next time as we look back at what has happened, what developments have happened, to what has actually happened. It's interesting to note that right now there are 13 countries looking for Flight 370, 57 ships, and 48 aircraft. And this is a lot of money being spent. And now with the air tracking going towards the Indian Ocean, my Lord, the search zone is 3 times the size of the United States.
Yeah, it's huge. So my suspicion is that by Monday, a lot of these mysteries will be resolved. All
right, you and I will talk next week, my friend. I want to thank you very much. Have a great weekend, Howard. And thanks very much for dropping by, buddy. Howard Bloom has been my guest this hour, the author of The Mohammed Code. www.howardbloom.net is his website. The Mohammed Code is available on Amazon.com. And Howard is also the author of The Genius of the Beast and The God Problem. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. For the Weird, the Bizarre on Flight 370, www.xzoneradiotv.com/Flight 370.htm.